Hello there! It's been a while since our last deck profile, and today we're going to be taking a look at Youthberk. So, Youthberk has been out for a couple weeks here in Japan with the release of set 6, and I can safely tell you this deck is very popular. A lot of people are playing this deck, a lot of people are bringing it to tournaments, and it's been seeing some success here and there and picking up some wins in some tournaments, but it's still believed to not necessarily be the best deck just yet. The reason why I say just yet, of course, is that much like Luard, some decks release in a pretty decent state, in a pretty tier 2 state, and then get better with time, such as Luard was during its initial release in G. So today we're going to take a look at the deck list itself that I've been piloting. I've brought it to a couple tournaments and have found some decent success with it, not necessarily great, oftentimes like 2-2 or 3-1 finishes. And there's many different ways to build the deck. You can choose to take it in a more grade 3 heavy approach, as we've seen some players play it with Alden. You can choose to play the trial deck Persona, just because Persona writing is very crucial in this deck, or you can play the build that we're going to present today, which is kind of like the cookie cutter build, which basically plays a lot of the cards that help to dig for more pieces in the deck and make sure that you're always finding more and more revolve forms, while also having a decent amount of attackers in the deck as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it and go over our ride line first and foremost. So we're going to start off with the Youth starter. So of course, Youth is just a normal starter. When you go second and right over it, you draw a card, but of course it is nice to have it. You can technically have any cutter starter, it doesn't actually matter unlike certain decks. Then we have the grade 1 Youth. Grade 1 Youth has two effects. First, on Vanguard Circle continuous, as well as on Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks for that battle, gains plus 2k, so it's just like the Reno from way back in the first trial deck. And then when you ride the grade 2 Youth over him, you can Soul Blast 1 and look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then choose a Youthburg named card from among those 3 and reveal it and add it to your hand, or choose a grade 2 or lower unit card and call it to Rearguard Circle, and then put the rest of the cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. So this is a very good effect, because for a cost of a Soul Blast 1, you get to either find yourself a Persona ride or a revolve form, or just have a Rearguard to attack with and thus accelerate your early game. So overall, a good ride line to use. Then the grade 2 Youthberg, which of course you ride into, says when you ride over him with a unit with the will+dress ability, you can cost 1 to choose a grade 2 or greater card from your drop zone and add it back to your hand. So this allows you to discard your Youthbergs from hand if you open a lot of them in the early game, and then get them back to your hand with this effect once you actually need them. Furthermore, when he attacks in Vanguard or Rearguard Circle while being boosted, you can Soul Blast 1 to gain plus 5k power, thus making him a 23k attacker if you wish to do that. But we have other ways to raise his power while on grade 2 as well. So a very good ride line because it lets you plus. And then for the ride deck, we do run the Skyfall Arms Youthberg. So Youthberg Skyfall Arms has two effects. The first one is the same as the trial deck one, which is will+dress, which is the gimmick of this deck. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked on Vanguard Circle. You can choose one revolve form card from your hand, ride it as stand, and for that turn lose 2 drives. Unfortunately, you do lose 2 drives, so you either go into one of the 2 revolve forms that are available to the deck, one of them being of course the Zest and the other one being the Gust, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then his second ability is, by discarding 1 card during your main phase once per turn, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and find a revolve form from among them and add it to your hand after revealing it, or find a grade 2 or lower from among them and call it to rear, and then put the rest of the cards to the bottom of your deck. So this allows you to either of course find the combo pieces that you need to keep revolve forming, or you find strong rear guards that you can actually attack with. So it is actually a pretty good card, and we run some cards in the deck too that make use of that discard cost as well. Of course, we run 3 copies of the card in the main deck as well. And of course, if you are to run the trial deck one, you would then basically put 4 copies into the main deck, because it counts as a Persona ride over the trial deck one as well. I've seen a lot of lists that run the trial deck one, and I think that that is a fine choice, but it's a bit harder to make space for all the cards that I want to play right now, so therefore we are running 3 copies in the main deck and 1 copy in the ride deck. And now let's get into the revolve forms. Now the revolve forms are both pretty decent, but one of them is more for going first, the other one is more for going second, and then after that it basically depends on if you Persona ride or not. So we're running 4 copies of the Youthberg revolve form Zest. So Zest has 2 effects. First one is when it's placed on the Vanguard Circle by your revolve-dress ability. For that turn, it gains plus 15k power, and for that, if during that turn you Persona Road, it also gets a crit. So going first, when you revolve form into this, it's basically a 28k attacker with no drive. So you kind of treat it as a 4th rear guard attack in a way. It's still 28k, so it's still going to ask for at least 20k shield, but then if you Persona Ride, it's going to be 38k with a crit, which of course is pretty strong, and we do like that kind of power powerful play that we have as well on the Persona Ride turns. And then all the revolve forms share this ability, which is at the end of the turn, you choose a will+dress ability possessing card from your soul and ride it as rest. So this goes to soul. So in a way, yes, you are losing a card from hand for going into this, and it's going to be a 28k or 38k with a crit, but then it goes to soul. So it's kind of like, imagine a rear guard that you have to discard one and soul charge one to restand. So that's kind of how it works. So you either play 3 or 4 copies of this. I'm for now still playing 4, but I am very tempted to put it down to 3 because this card is really nice for going first. It's the only revolve form you can actually use going first. And going first, making 4 attacks and playing this deck more aggressively with a higher pressure point is overall recommended. So please do keep that in mind, that you do want to play quite aggressively with this deck. It's not necessarily a tempo deck in that sense. And then we're playing 3 copies of the Gust. Now the Gust is the only revolve form that can drive check right now because his second skill is the same, where at the end of the turn you will basically ride the original Youthberk back at the end phase. But his first effect is when he's placed on Vanguard Circle by a revolve+dress ability. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, so this only works when you're going second, you can discard 1 card from hand, and then this unit gains plus 10k power and plus 1 drive. So this drive threat is actually very important, and we've seen players that have been succeeding with the deck running 4 copies of this and 3 copies of Zest. But if you do go first, you still cannot use this card, right? So you either don't revolve+dress at all, or you have to have a Zest. But the Gust is very good because of the fact that it gains that extra drive, which gives that extra threat and makes it harder for your opponent to guard it. And of course, having more drive checks in a turn means that you are actually having a higher probability of seeing your overtrigger as well. So we're running basically 7 revolve forms for the time being, and I think that they both work quite well. And it's up to you whether you want to run 4 of one or 3 of the other. In order to find our revolve forms, we're running 4 copies of the Schneisel, which I will pull up here. Let me zoom out a little bit. So Schneisel has 2 effects. The first one of which is when placed on rearguard circle, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck and find a Youthberk from among them and reveal an edit to your hand, and then for that turn gain 5k. So if you whip it, you do pay Calabas 1 just for 5k, which is kind of the bad part of this card. But if you want to find either a Persona Ride or a revolve+dress is really, really important, and especially having the ability to find Persona Ride off of this in the early game is really good. Say you call it off of the grade 2 skill of the Ride line, or like when you go to grade 2, you can count off 1 immediately and look for top 5 and find a Persona Ride, which is really good. And his second skill is also really good, which says when he attacks your opponent's Vanguard, if during this turn your Vanguard was placed by riding from a grade 3, then you can choose your Vanguard and give it plus 5k power. So keep in mind, it's the Vanguard that gains that power. So this deck kind of wants to go like attack with Vanguard first, and attack with 2 Schneisels, and then attack with the second Vanguard last, because this will basically give plus 5k or plus 10k if you have 2 of them in order to buff up the Vanguard even more. The other important thing to note is that when you Persona Ride, the second skill also works, so you don't actually have to go into the revolve form. You can actually swing with him first to buff up your Persona ridden Skyfall arms, and then attack with the Skyfall arms with 28, asking for a bit more shield in that sense too. So Schneisel is basically the best rearguard that you can ask for. The second best one, of course, being the Kadawara. So Kadawara is the card from the trial deck in the expansion pack of the trial deck, and Kadawara has just one good skill, which is during the battle, at the end of the battle, that he attacked the Vanguard. If you have exactly 4 or more units, so basically if you have your Vanguard and then 3 rears, you can use this effect, which is to soul blast 1 and retire him, to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then find a grade 2 or greater unit card and reveal it and add it to your hand, shuffle your deck, and then if you do not add anything, because it says up to 1, you draw 1. So let's say you look at top 3 and it's 3 triggers, right? Then obviously you cannot add anything, so you shuffle those 3 triggers back and then you draw 1. So it's still going to be a break even no matter what. You cannot whip this skill, but this again is another card that helps dig for Persona Ride, helps dig for revolve forms, helps find your Schneisel, which can help you dig as well. So overall it is a very good card, and a very good card to run as a 4 of 2. Now you'll notice as well that we need to discard 1 for the cost of the Skyfall arms in order to get the Superior Call effect or the search effect. So we're running 4 copies of the Menacing Tiger. Menacing Tiger has 2 effects. The first one is during your turn, when this card is discarded from hand, you can counterblast 1 to call this card as rest. So it's just like Chrono Tooth Tigar, sorry, not Chrono Fang from Gear Chronicle. And the second skill is when this unit is placed on a rearguard circle, you can soul blast 1 to give your Vanguard plus 5k power. So whether you place it by this effect, so for example, use Youthberk skill, pitch this to call something out, let's say, or find a revolve form, and then you counterblast 1 to call this out, and then you soul blast 1 to give the Vanguard plus 5k. Even an 18k Vanguard is harder to guard, right? Because that asks your opponent to put down a front front with the extra effect. So therefore it's very good. And if you call this by an effect, like let's say through Youthberg's effect, right? You just find this and you call it down. You can then Soul Blast 1 and buff up your Vanguard and use him as an AK booster because it does not come into play as rest in that case. So overall it's a good card. You can reduce this to 3, and I've seen some people even play it as like a 2 of. To run the defensive grade 2 that'll pop up here, which you can see basically is a 10k shield grade 2. They can also use as an attacker, which is also a pretty useful card for the time being. But I like to have 4 of this because I really want to see it. If you discard it for the ride deck, then you can also buff up your Vanguard on the grade 2 turn to swing for 15, and just like the Orpheus ride line, that's kind of annoying to guard for the opponent. And of course when you discard it for the Skyfall arms effect, that's also going to be very good because it buffs up the Vanguard too. And it kind of makes that discard 1 actually end up being a plus rather than a break even, which this deck does a lot. And speaking of break evens, our final grade 1 is going to be the Painkiller Angel. Painkiller Angel of course is a very generic card. At the end of the battle that she boosted, you can Soul Blast 1 and retire her to draw 1. So again, this is just another card that helps us dig for persona rides as well as for the revolve forms, because having them is the most important thing, and being able to run through the deck and find them is really important. And one of the strengths of this deck is to be able to play the long game and do these 4 attacks every single turn, which will then allow you to also compress your deck and sometimes even use the Skyfall arms effect to discard 1, look at top 3, put 3 triggers to the bottom of like a 4-card deck, and then basically make sure that your 3 drive checks that turn are actually winning ones, right? So that's why I think that Painkiller Angel is actually quite useful in this deck too. Then for Sentinels, we are playing 3 copies of the regular, you know, the 1-card hand Sentinel. So this is the same skill as the one that you guys already have in English, but it's just a new art. And then we're playing 1 copy of the Blitz Order. So I think this is the first time I've shown the Blitz Order in a video. So this Blitz Order is very important. It is can be used in any deck. And if your Vanguard is grade 3 or lower, you can discard 1 to play this. And then basically it works as a Sentinel, but then it removes itself from game. So you cannot use this if your Vanguard is grade 4, right? Keep that in mind. But the first skill is if your opponent's Vanguard has triple drive. So if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 4, like Kyrie, for example, you can actually play this card without paying the cost. So that's really cool. If your opponent is on Kyrie grade 4 or on Pure Light or on Mahar, you can play this for free and it's going to be a PG. And because it doesn't go to the Guardian Circle, it actually bypasses guard restrict. So like God of Arena's guard restrict, or any of like the, the Barrow uses like the greed on grade 1 to give you the like 2-card hand guard restrict, and this also bypasses it. So it's a very good card, and this is kind of like how you should be running your Sentinel lineup, except if you play grade 4 decks, right? So Mahar, for example, will not want to see this. Then for the triggers, we're actually running rainbows. So we're running 3 draws because we actually run the risk of decking out if we run too many, I think. And I do think that 3 is kind of the perfect number. You can choose to play 3 or 4 depending on your preference, I would say. Then we're running 4 fronts because fronts are really good in this meta, especially because this deck does kind of go through the deck very fast. I've run 8 crit for quite a while, but I felt like the crits were good. But because of the attack order of this deck, you oftentimes go Vanguard first, so checking a front and beefing up your rear is really good. Because your Vanguard is already always going to be strong, but your rears are oftentimes hitting for like 23 or 18, so giving that front to them is really, really important. And the 20k shield is really good in this meta because there's a lot of Vanguards that hit for 18. So like Orpheus Regis, Youthberk himself with like the Tiger. Eva as well is another deck that's kind of starting to pop up a bit. So fronts have been really, really good in this meta, so I do recommend them a lot. Then of course we're also playing 4 of the effect crits. The effect crits are pretty important right now because we need the soul in this deck, and as a result they are going to be very useful as well. So 4 of the effect crits. And then we're running a 2-2 split of heals. We're running 2 regular heals. These are the ones from the trial deck, I believe. And then 2 copies of the counter heals, which work when your opponent has a restanding rear. Now, this deck runs quite a few grade 3s, as revolve forms. And as a result, we do need to have a bit more shield for stuff like Mahar and multi-attacking decks like Flagberg, where we basically want to keep our hand because it's all pieces. So decks that, for example, call their pieces from drop, like Zorga, or call from deck, don't necessarily need these heals as much. They might want the crit heals more just to guard the big attacks instead. But decks that play a lot of pieces that don't want to be ditching them as shield all the time will probably prefer these counter heals instead. And in general, most decks right now are playing counter heals, so I really recommend starting to pick these up because they are very, very good. So yes, we have a 2-2 split on the heals. And then finally, the overtrigger is the Keter Sanctuary overtrigger because giving your rears a drive check is always going to be good, and it is a form of raw plus. So that is the main deck itself. Now let's quickly go over some plays. Alright, so let's play a quick demo game. So we're going to do a roll for going first or second. This is heads, this is tails, so let's say we call heads. Alright, so we're going to be going first. So in the going first mulligan, you always want to be kind of targeting to have a Zest in hand. This opening hand is actually pretty good. We have a Persona Ride, we definitely want to keep that. Water is also pretty good keep too. The Gust is okay. We're going first, we're not going to be able to use it, so we might actually want to toss it. And I think the Painkiller is going to be a keep as well. It'd be nice to get the Tiger at some point too, as well as draw into a Zest. So I think the Gust we are going to toss here for the time being because we cannot use it until turn 4. So we're going to draw 2. We have a Schneisel and a PG, so Schneisel will help us find the pieces that we need as well. So now let's shuffle our deck after the cut and see what we get. Alright, the deck has been shuffled and now we're good to go. Alright, so we're going to draw for our first turn, and then here basically because of the ride line skill, you can kind of ditch your grade 3s and grade 2s because the grade 2 Youthberk gets them back. So let's say we're going to ditch our Kelowara, we're probably going to use it a bit later, so let's ditch it and then go into the grade 1, and then we don't do anything going first because it's not that kind of ride line. So we're going to just pass here, our opponent's going to attack into us, we're going to check a defensive draw, which is pretty good, we're going to draw that, and then draw for turn after that as well. We see a Gust come back here as well, but now we don't really have good discard fodder, and we kind of want to use a Schneisel on this turn too. And we might even use the Painkiller to dig into the Gust, which I think, or into the Zest rather, which is very important. I think we can actually pitch the Gust and we'll get that back for the ride line instead, and then ride into the grade 1, right? So we ride into the grade 1, we're going to Soul Blast for the grade 1's effect, and look at the top 3 cards of the deck, and we're going to find the Zest, rather, I always mix up the names of these cards, and then put the rest to the bottom of the deck in any order. We can put the PG up top. We will shuffle with the Schneisel, so it doesn't really matter as much. So we've added to hand, and now we can start pushing a little bit with our rear, so let's call down the Schneisel here. Schneisels effect will activate, we're going to CB1 to look at top 5 for a revolve form or a Youthberg. We're going to whip the search, but that's not necessarily the end of the world. We're going to shuffle the deck and make sure that that PG and the Tiger go back up top, or at least somewhere else in the deck and not on the bottom. So this way we can actually try to draw into them later down the line. And then here I think we're going to call down the Painkiller to use our remaining soul. So here we're going to swing for just 10, which is necessarily a great big attack. With the Tiger this would be 15 instead. Check a drive, find ourselves a another Schneisel for next turn, and then this is going to be a nice 23k swing, which going first our opponent is on 8k, which means that we are hitting for a good number. And then here we can Soul Blast 1 for the effect of the Painkiller to draw a card and find something else. So we find another Zest, which is very nice. Next turn I'm going to take an attack, get a defensive, which is obviously very, very good. And we don't really need much damage for our early play, so you can actually go ahead and like guard some of these attacks in order to make sure that you don't take too much damage, because the only thing you really want is like CB for Schneisel, right? So maybe you want to keep this Schneisel on board. Keep in mind it won't have the plus 5k, so we guard with this, something along those lines. So here we're going to restand and draw. We get another PG in hand, which is not necessarily something we need. Next turn we will have a turn 4 Persona Ride, so the Zest will actually be quite useful. So let's say we ditch this one here for starters and go into the Youthberg, and now we can use the Youth's effect to counterblast 1 and get back the Gust for a later turn here as well. So we're going to add that to hand. And so now we can kind of choose to use our effects as we wish. We can use the Youth effect here to kind of just like push with another attacker, but ditching something in this hand is actually quite difficult. We know that there's still 2 Gusts left in the deck, and the Zests are quickly reducing as well, so in that sense we need to be careful what we discard. Because we're kind of aiming for a Persona Ride next turn, we should have a chance to draw into another one of them, and we do want to use this as an attacker this turn, so let's ditch this in order to use Youthberk skill here to look at the top 3, and hopefully not see the triple heal. That would have been quite scary, and put these 2 heals to the bottom, which is a bit of a sad sight, but it's not too bad, not the end of the world. Then we're going to call down one of our Schneisels here to just attack with. As our opponent is still on grade 2, this means we can kind of push with a fair amount of attacks. So here we can basically swing with a 13. Chances are our opponent will guard that with a 15k, so we're going to check our 2 cards. We still get a heal, which is pretty good. Let's take a look at what damage we have. Nothing too important, so let's just heal that out and again give power to the Schneisel. And then second check, we get another Persona Ride, which is very good. And then here, of course, the timing for the revolve form will take place, where we will go into the Zest, and then here you basically swing for 10, this gets 5, swing with 20, this gets 5, and then this is going to swing with 38, asking for quite a lot of shield, and then at the end of the turn go to the soul, and that's going to be the end of the turn. Next turn, let's say we get crit, so we're going to take 2 damage out of nowhere, get no defensives. We're still on 3, so we can kind of afford to take another damage. So let's say we take that one, get another draw, we're now on 4, we get a front, so that's perfect. We can kind of guard some attack here with some shield, and then pass on a double Schneisel, which I think is pretty good for next turn too. We're going to Persona Ride, and of course get some extra power. A very good draw has come out as well, so we can ditch this for the Youthberg skill to look at top 3 and see what we find. So of course this only searches revolve forms, so you cannot add this Youthberg, but we can find ourselves a Kelowara, and then the rest will go on the bottom, and then we're going to use the skill of the Tiger here 2 counter +1, pull it out, and then of course use the skill to solve +1 to give +5k to the Vanguard. Now you could try to dig for more cards with the Schneisel, but since we have a full, full board at the moment, I think it's fine to just go on like this. So there's going to be a 28 attacking to the Vanguard. We're going to get a Tiger and a Tiger for later turns, I suppose. And then of course go into our revolve form, which is going to be a 38k with a crit. But with these two attacks of 20 and 20, we can make that into a 48 with a crit, and that's just kind of like the overall path of the deck. So you're kind of just doing this over and over again, and then this goes, to your soul. Next turn, you're going to take a damage, you're going to guard a bunch, and then next turn, draw for turn, do your Persona Ride, look at top 3, try to find a revolve form, and then just kind of rinse and repeat. So, dear viewers, I hope you enjoyed this video and this first look at Youthberg. This is definitely one of the more kind of like cookie cutter builds that we have so far in set 6, and hopefully the deck gets some good upgrades in set 7 as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, of course, about Youthberg as a deck, if you've been testing it on, with proxies or CFA and stuff like that. And of course, what kind of builds you've been playing with. There's really a lot of different ways to build this deck because of how flexible the engine is. All you really need is the Youthbergs themselves, as well as like Schneisel for searching, and then everything else you can kind of change around and try out many different builds of this deck too. But for those that are kind of lost on how to build this deck, I hope this gave you a good introductory kind of lesson, I suppose, to the deck itself. Of course, if you liked the video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our channel members: Platinum Wolf 2009, Christian, Kyrie's Darkblade, Arcana Master, Tristan H, Martinich67, Michael Lockett, The Real ZBD, Stogan, X Tempest, KSGG, Chris Branham, Mr. Turkey, Zach S, Coolio Ash, Cardinal Joker, FS Middle 91, Kerry Barger, Very Flores, Logan Coat, and Crowned Clown. Thank you very much for your long support. And if you want to become a channel member and get some early preview to content, as well as join our special Discord channel that we have that is exclusively for YouTube channel members and Twitch subs, then make sure to become a member today. But anyway, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.